했으면 좋겠어요. 어쨌든 저는 21세기 사람이니까 21세기 트렌드를 또 잃으면 안 될 것 같아서 간혹은 또 가요나 팝송도 많이 들으려고 노력하고 있고요. 그러다가도 또 이제 다시 클래식으로 돌아오게 되더라고요. 그냥 클래식 음악은 진짜 어떤 시대에 들어도 누구나 공감할 수 있다고 생각을 해서 그래서 클래식 음악이 제일 마음에 와닿는 것 같아요. 지나바카오 콩쿠르에서 특히 2라운드 연주가 저는 항상 기억에 남는 게 너무 무서웠어요. 사실 한음 치는데 다음 음이 뭐였는지 기억이 안 날까 봐 너무 두렵더라고요. 악몽을 너무 많이 꿨었고 연습을 하는데도 불구하고 끝까지 안 되는 음악적인 패시지라든지 테크닉적인 패시지들이 있는데 그게 무대 위에서 정말 무의식적인 세계에서 갑자기 해결이 되는 경우가 있더라고요. 그랬을 때 이제 희열을 확 느끼는 것 같아요. 제가 지금 공부하고 있는 곡들, 즐겨 연주하고 있는 곡들이 사실 클래식 음악을 처음 접하는 분들에겐 익숙하지 않은 곡들이지만 지금 제 나이에 가장 잘 표현할 수 있는 음악이라고 생각을 해서 그런 레퍼토리를 준비를 하고 있는 거니까 같이 즐겨주시고 같이 공유해주시면 감사하겠습니다.
In our headlines on this Monday, December 15th, here in South Korea, a 6-month investigation by a special counsel team finds that the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration sought to spark a military confrontation with North Korea to create a pretext for martial law. Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung placed host to his Laos counterpart Thongloun Sisoulith earlier on this Monday and agrees to advance their bilateral ties into a comprehensive partnership. And on the trade front, exports of South Korea's information and communications technology products expand over 24% on year in November to post $25.4 billion, driven by demand for chips. We start with findings by the Special Counsel team following its 6-month probe into the former administration's martial law declaration on December 3rd last year. Our Park Konu has our top story.
A team of around 240 investigators began probing the case last June, and after 6 months, the investigation has now come to an end. On Monday, Special Prosecutor Cho Eun-seok announced the findings of the probe into insurrection and treason charges, allegedly led by former President Yoon Suk-yeol. Cho said the investigation concluded that Yoon's declaration of martial law in December last year was aimed at eliminating political opponents and suppressing dissent, rather than the reasons Yoon cited during his martial law declaration, including repeated impeachments and budget cuts since the 2024 general election in April. Cho added that investigators identified circumstantial evidence showing Yoon and his associates had been preparing for the move well before the actual declaration.
Yoon and others had been preparing for the declaration of martial law since before October 2023. They planned to suspend political activities and the functions of the National Assembly through military force, establish an emergency legislative body to replace the Assembly, seize legislative and judicial authority, eliminate opposition forces, and monopolize power.
He added that December 3rd was chosen to minimize potential U.S. involvement, as it was close to the U.S. presidential election. The special prosecutor also revealed circumstances showing close coordination between the government and the military. He said the relocation of the presidential office to Yongsan in central Seoul, where the defense ministry is located, facilitated closer ties, leading to frequent meetings between Yoon and then Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun over plans for martial law. Investigators also said the previous Defense Minister Shin Won-sik stepping down was linked to the issue, as Shin had opposed martial law. And he added that legal risks surrounding former First Lady Kim Gon-hee were an underlying factor, though it was not viewed as a primary motive. Efforts to provoke North Korea were also revealed as a pretext for declaring martial law.
We found that abnormal military operations were carried out from October 2024 to provoke North Korea and justify martial law, but the effort failed when Pyongyang did not respond. Yoon and others then used the political situation as a pretext and declared martial law late on December 3rd, despite having no legal grounds.
Over the 180-day investigation, the prosecution team indicted 27 people, including Yoon, and sent them to trial. With the probe now concluded, around 30 prosecutors, including Cho, will remain to handle trial proceedings, which are expected to take place in early January and oversee the prosecutions in court. Park Konu, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the police raid at Coupang is coming to a close, and authorities are soon expected to delve deeper into the cause and circumstances of the massive leak of personal data at the e-commerce platform. Our Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
The Seoul Metropolitan Police Agency says more than 60% of the materials needed for its investigation into the Coupang data breach have been secured. In a press briefing on Monday, Seoul Police Chief Park Jung-bo stated that the search-and-seizure operation, which has been ongoing for several days, is expected to be concluded by Tuesday at the latest. Chief Park explained that the process has taken longer than anticipated because investigators are selectively seizing relevant evidence from a vast amount of raw data to minimize business disruption. While there were initially some disagreements between the police and Coupang regarding the scope of the seizure on the first day, authorities say the company is now cooperating smoothly. Investigators plan to analyze the secure data to definitively trace the leakage pathway and identify any internal security failures. Police are also looking to secure the custody of the primary suspect, a Chinese national and former Coupang employee who is currently believed to be overseas. While the police investigation enters its final phase, the company's leadership is facing a backlash from the National Assembly after Coupang founder and chairman Kim Bum-seok officially declined a request to appear as a witness at the upcoming parliamentary hearing scheduled for December 17th. Kim submitted a statement of non-attendance citing unavoidable overseas business schedules and his residence outside of Korea. With the company's owner refusing to face lawmakers, criticism is mounting regarding Coupang's corporate accountability in the wake of one of the country's largest data breaches. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Staying in Seoul, President Lee Jae-myung played host to his Laos counterpart Thongloun Sisoulith earlier on this Monday, and the two leaders have agreed to advance their bilateral ties into a comprehensive partnership. Arirang's Yoon Jung-min covers this agreement and more.
Celebrating 30 years of restored diplomatic relations, South Korea and Laos have agreed to upgrade their ties to a comprehensive partnership. This as President Lee Jae-myung hosted Laotian President Thongloun Sisoulith at his office on Monday, having invited him for a two-day official visit.
풍부한 천연 자원을 보유하고 있는 라오스는 핵심 광물 공급망 구축을 위한 중요한 파트너 국가이기도 합니다.
Laos aims to transform itself as a regional hub for transportation and logistics, and President Lee expressed hopes to work together as a partner along the way, hoping for a mutually beneficial and future-oriented partnership that can actually benefit the people.
It is an opportunity to reaffirm the success that the two countries have achieved by cooperating in various fields over the past 30 years.
Since restoring relations in 1995 that were severed following the rise of communist governments in Southeast Asia in the 1970s, the trade volume between South Korea and Laos has grown 20-fold, on top of people-to-people exchanges, hitting a record high last year.
한국은 라오스국 입장에서 보면 3대 개발 협력 파트너이고 5위의 투자 국가이며 또 라오스는 한 아세안, 한 메콩 협력의 매우 중요한 파트너 국가입니다.
Laos is still not able to graduate from the least developed country status. I ask for your support in this matter.
The focus was also on the two countries bolstering coordination to combat transnational crimes, such as online scams. Following the talks, the two sides signed law enforcement and extradition treaties and renewed an MOU related to the employment permit system. The summit concluded with a luncheon hosted by the South Korean first couple. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung has been featured in Time magazine's top 100 photos of the year 2025. According to the magazine's website, the selected image captures President Lee, who was then the Democratic Party's presidential candidate, preparing to address his supporters as he awaited the final poll results on June 4th. Earlier this past April, Time also included the president on its list of the top 100 most influential people of the year, describing him as the clear frontrunner in South Korea's snap presidential election. South Korea's exports of ICT products hit a new high in November, driven by demand for chips. Our Ian Jin covers the latest trade numbers.
Exports of South Korea's information and communications technology products jumped more than 20% year-on-year in November to post the highest monthly figure on record. According to data from the South Korean Ministry of Science and ICT on Sunday, ICT exports in November rose 24.3% from a year earlier to reach a record $25.4 billion. Following strong ICT export figures in September and October, this marks the 10th consecutive month of on-year growth. This performance was effectively driven by semiconductors, which accounted for about 68% of total ICT exports and recorded the highest ever performance for a single product category. Chip exports surged 38.6% on year. But mobile phone exports only grew 3.5%, computers and peripheral devices 1.9%, and telecommunications devices 3.3%, while exports of displays dropped by 3.7%. By region, ICT exports to China continued to rise, up 25.3%. Shipments to Vietnam were up 11.6%, those to the EU were up 18.1%, and ICT exports to the United States were up 7.9%. Semiconductor exports to the U.S. jumped 43.3% to $1.58 billion. Despite uncertainties related to tariffs and reshoring policies, expanded investment in AI data centers is believed to have driven demand. Meanwhile, imports of ICT products rose 2.7% on year to $12.7 billion, marking a record trade surplus of nearly $12.7 billion. Both ICT exports and the trade surplus logged their highest levels since records began. 이은진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in Australia, 2 armed attackers opened fire at a Hanukkah celebration on a beach in Sydney this past Sunday, killing more than a dozen people. Our Park Chun-han reports.
Multiple shots were fired at Australia's Bondi Beach on Sunday, where hundreds of people from the Jewish community were gathered for the start of the 8-day Hanukkah festival. The authorities said the shooting claimed at least 16 people's lives and injured more than 40 others. The victims' ages ranged from 10 to 87 years old. Police identified the shooters as a father and son, with the father having 6 firearms licensed to him. The 50-year-old father was shot dead by police at the scene, while his 24-year-old son was quickly wounded and is now hospitalized. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese labeled the attack as an apparent act of anti-Semitism and terrorism.
Today, all Australians wrap our arms around them and say, we stand with you. We will do whatever is necessary to stamp out anti-Semitism. It is a scourge and we will eradicate it together.
Global leaders from the US, UK, France, and many other countries raised concerns and condemned the horrible incident. Shocked by the tragic attack at Bondi Beach, European Union Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said, quote, "I send my heartfelt condolences to the families and loved ones of the victims. Europe stands with Australia and Jewish communities everywhere. We are united against violence, anti-Semitism, and hatred." The tragedy marks Australia's worst shooting in 29 years in a country well known for imposing strict gun laws. Following the attack, major cities around the world, including New York, Berlin, and London, stepped up security around Hanukkah events. Park Chun-han, Arirang News.
Advances in science directly affect the conservation and, in some cases, the restoration of historical artifacts. And for a visual understanding of this reality, there are a few related exhibitions currently underway. Our Cha Yun-kyung files this report.
This is the appointment document from 1690, when the 20th king of the Joseon dynasty, Gyeongjong, was invested as crown prince. The backing that had been added to the original was replaced with mulberry paper and the faded writing carefully restored. This is a jade-beaded curtain from the imperial household of the Korean Empire that is currently undergoing conservation treatment. The stringing method for the beads is intricate, and the key issue is how to restore the old threads.
Since the silk fibers are in a less deteriorated condition than the hemp fibers, the threads can be preserved. The question we are considering is to what extent we should retain these original threads during the conservation process.
At the special exhibition organized by the National Palace Museum of Korea, visitors can see both the actual conservation process and the restored artifacts together. The exhibition also includes a section that provides an overview of the history of conservation science. Korea's cultural heritage conservation work began in the mid-1970s at the National Museum of Korea, starting with basic techniques such as microscopic examination and X-ray imaging.
Conservation science in Korea began in 1976 with nothing more than a single toothpick. Since then, advanced technologies such as CT scanning have been used to reveal the structures, internal composition, materials, and various hidden aspects of our cultural heritages.
The National Museum of Korea will hold a special exhibition, Conservation Science, A New Beginning, A Shared Future, showing the history of conservation science until June next year. The National Palace Museum of Korea will hold a special exhibition, Reborn, Connecting Time Through Conservation Science, until February next year, elaborating on restored artifacts. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
Ensuring accessibility is essential to further promoting a place of prominence, and this is precisely what relevant authorities are seeking to ensure for Namsan Mountain here in Seoul, especially following its featuring in Netflix's animation K-pop Demon Hunters. Our Lee Soo-jin explains.
The globally popular animated movie K-pop Demon Hunters features Namsan Mountain, a famous landmark in Seoul. Riding the wave of the movie's craze, people from around the world have been visiting the site, but its limited accessibility and long waits for the cable car have been the cause of frequent complaints. This is because a single company has held exclusive rights to operate just two 48-passenger cable cars. This has become such a serious issue that even the government has stepped in to criticize it.
Despite the surge in tourists driven by the popularity of the movie, complaints about the quality of the Namsan cable car service continue. The root of the problem lies in a preferential business license granted in 1961 that has remained in place for more than 60 years.
To solve the problem, the Seoul metropolitan government is moving forward with a new gondola system using 25 10-passenger cabins capable of transporting more than 2,000 people per hour. With this system, wheelchair users and parents with strollers will be able to travel from Myeongdong Station to the top of Namsan Mountain in just 5 minutes. The city aims to complete the project by 2027, but the outcome of the first court ruling on December 19th, which was filed by the company holding the monopoly, remains a key issue.
If we win, construction starts right away. And even if we lose, a decree revision will still allow the gondola project. So I urge the government to proceed with the revision.
Along with this, a 360-degree observatory will be built at the summit of Namsan Mountain, allowing visitors to look out over the city in every direction. The city plans to revitalize Namsan Mountain into a world-class landmark that goes beyond just representing Seoul. 이수진, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In Berlin, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has signaled a major diplomatic shift as Ukraine and the United States held talks aimed at ending the war with Russia. Zelensky said Ukraine is ready to drop its bid to join NATO in exchange for Western security guarantees on Sunday, but rejected U.S. proposals to give up Ukrainian territory. Zelensky met with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Presidential Advisor Jared Kushner alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The Ukrainian leader said any security guarantees must be legally binding and approved by the U.S. Congress, calling the NATO concession a compromise to prevent further Russian aggression. Russia has demanded that Ukraine abandons its NATO ambitions as part of any peace deal. In the United States, one of the top contenders for the Federal Reserve Chair, Kevin Hassett, has pushed back against concerns over political pressure on the Fed. Hassett said on Sunday that if he becomes chair, President Donald Trump would carry, quote, no weight in the Fed's interest rate decisions. Hassett added the Federal Open Market Committee sets rates by vote, not the president, stressing that the Fed operates independently. Trump has said his pick to replace Fed Chair Jerome Powell, whose term ends in May, is down to the two Kevins, Kevin Hassett and former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh. In India, a tour appearance in Kolkata by football star Lionel Messi ended in crowd chaos. Fans at Salt Lake Stadium on Saturday ripped up seats, threw objects, and entered the field after Messi stayed for about 20 minutes at the ticketed event, far shorter than what many fans had expected. Videos showed supporters climbing fences and hurling debris as security struggled to regain control. Police later detained the event's chief organizer, and West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee apologized to Messi and ordered an investigation into crowd management. Officials pledged refunds for ticket holders. Jobs website Glassdoor has named the term, quote, fatigue as its word of the year for 2025. It cited widespread exhaustion across the workforce. The platform recorded a 41% surge in mentions as workers flagged politics, economic uncertainty, stagflation, and AI disruption as major stress drivers. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
The snow from the weekend has not fully melted yet, leaving many icy roads. A brief cold snap hit us again this morning. Seoul plunged to minus 3.5 degrees Celsius this morning, about 2 degrees lower than yesterday. However, the air warmed up quickly during the day. No severe cold spells are expected this week. Temperatures will climb back to above freezing tomorrow morning, and daytime temperatures will move up to around 8 degrees, which will be milder than the average for this time of year. Seoul will start off at 3 degrees tomorrow with Chuncheon and Gyeongju at minus 2 degrees. Daily highs will move up to double digits in most areas with Daejeon and Daegu at 12 degrees, Busan at 14 degrees. Tomorrow, about 1 centimeter of snow is forecast around inland and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province, and there will be some light rain in northern parts of Gyeonggi-do and Chungcheongbuk-do provinces. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at the start here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
A country where traditional and modern cultures coexist.
Where you can explore spectacular landscapes and nature.
Savor the delights of traveling at every turn.
Where? Korea, of course.
There are some must-visit places in Korea. Ones that appear in every tour guidebook: Hangang River, Gyeongbokgung Palace from the Joseon Dynasty, and
Yes, these are essentials, but I want to go somewhere a little different. I don't have to follow the guidebook. For example, filming locations for K-pop music videos or K-dramas and movies.
traveling is all about taking it slow. A long walk at your own pace, or even zoning out somewhere quiet. Doesn't it sound relaxing?
You travel for the experience, trying something new in a foreign place, de-stressing and making lifetime memories, taking tons of pictures along the way.
70% of the Korean territory is mountainous. Naturally, hiking is a very popular pastime in Korea. Not your kind of activity? Trust me, the view will make the effort worth it. Just catch your breath by the cold stream in the valley.
Korea is surrounded by the sea on three sides. From the beach, you can enjoy a wide open view, as well as various water activities. But the riverside is great too. There's plenty to see and do.
If you're in Korea, you can't miss the night view full of dazzling lights.
Yes, even the same place can have a totally different vibe at night.
Want to make unforgettable memories?
How about traveling to all corners of Korea? Join us next time to explore more about Korean culture.
On Press Perspective today, we delve into South Korea's defense market and the latest deal that the country has sealed. Do stay with us. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, December 15th here in Seoul. I'm Minsan Hee. South Korea recently inked a preliminary agreement with Peru for the sale of its military land vehicles. For more on this defense market development, I have Stephen Borwick with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Kim Jun-mo at Konkuk University joining this session virtually. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Stephen, let's begin with details about this preliminary deal for the sale of South Korea's military land vehicles to Peru.
So it's a total of 195 units, and among those are 54 K2 tanks and 141 wheeled armor vehicles. I would say the significance of this is that it represents South Korean defense makers. I believe it's Hyundai Rotem and STX that are involved in this, reaching out to and scoring a deal in a new part of the world. So in recent years, since the start of the Russian war in Ukraine, there's been a lot of inroads by the K defense sector in striking deals with Poland and with other countries in Eastern Europe who are looking to the countries that are kind of in Russia's orbit, that are looking to buttress their own defenses, that are looking to quickly boost their military capabilities to ward off any kind of regional uncertainty. But as far as I know, this is the first kind of major deal that's been announced between South Korea and a country in Latin America. And according to reports, if this deal is officially sealed, it would mark the beginning, the first ever, the biggest ever deal between South Korean defense makers and a country in that part of the world. So it represents a continued evolution of the K defense sector.
Right, and I understand this particular deal, Stephen, includes two key parts. Could you walk us through them?
Yeah, it's two parts of a kind of bigger process, and the timeline that we're dealing with is next year to the year 2040. And just for people who are watching, to me, the kind of interesting takeaway is that it's a long process of preparing for local production. So this is something that I think is kind of new to Korean defense makers. They tend to make a lot of their own stuff in-house, but I think my understanding is that in recent years, as their business has increased, they have had to enter into a new kind of arrangement where they are preparing local companies to be able to produce this stuff for themselves. And so in this particular case, phase one goes from next year until 2028. And this involves the delivery of vehicles and the kind of training by the South Korean firms of local staff to be able to maintain and repair these things on their own. And then the second phase of the agreement goes from 2029 to 2040. And that's when the idea is that in Peru, they will be able to produce all of these things on their own. And so I think it's significant in that it's a kind of an encapsulation of how the K defense sector is evolving. I believe K companies have entered into similar agreements in Romania and other countries. But as I said before, this is a kind of illustration of how these K defense companies are looking to expand and looking to keep things going as the global security landscape evolves.
Right then, speaking within your capacity as a scholar, Professor Kim, what more can you tell us about the significance of this latest deal with Peru for South Korea?
Yes, this is the second largest sales of K2 tanks after our Poland case. And after Poland, we can call it as another home run, which will bring in a series of K2 tank sales in South America, the Middle East, and possibly in Europe. For example, K9 has been the world's best seller Hoicher by taking about 60% of international market. K2 tank has been a dark horse so far, but with the sales, we can claim that K2 tank is one of the three major main battle tanks in the international market. So that's one significance. Second significance would be this is a successful arms export case packaged with industrial cooperation.
Professor Kim, for the sake of our general audience then, could you walk us through the K defense market? I mean, how big is it and who are the movers and shakers, if you will, and what makes South Korea a productive partner with regard to arms for its global counterparts?
Yes, Korea takes the 10th largest arms exporting country according to the Stockholm Peace Research Report. And we are aiming at becoming fourth largest arms exporting country by year 2030. We have various size defense contractors, and I can name 4 or 5 major ones. For example, Hana Aerospace has wider scope of products ranging from K9 Hoichers, Redback armored infantry vehicles, Cheongung air defense missile systems, and Cheonmu multiple rocket systems. LIG Next One is a very specialized company producing missile systems, including Cheongung air defense missiles and Raybolt anti-tank missiles and others. And we have Hyundai Rotem, producer of K2 tanks and K808 wheeled armored personnel carrier to be exported to Peru. And in the civilian sector, Hyundai Rotem is a producer of high-speed train. And we have Kai, system integrator of KF-21 and FA-50 fighter jets. Both have great potential for export markets. And we have Hana Ocean and Hyundai Heavy Industries, both are mega-sized shipbuilders that can build surface combatants and submarines with different displacement. And what makes Korean companies appealing in the international market? First, price and quality both met in international market. Second, our Korean defense products have compatibility with existing Western products and ammunitions. Third, fast delivery, industrial cooperation, and wide range of products. And in addition to all this, Korean government is trying to make a strategic export fund in addition to augment export-import bank financing mechanism. And this fund is aimed at defense product export and nuclear power plant export potentially. So these are the factors.
Right, good to know, Professor. And Stephen, with regard to Peru's decision to strike a deal with South Korea, what can you tell us about Peru's reasons for wanting to modernize its military?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert on the history of the Peruvian military or of the particular security threats faced by Peru, but from what I've read, it just seemed like the Peruvian military had been dealing with some aging equipment and kind of aging facilities, and there was just a need to bring in some new and more adept equipment. And South Korea, for the reasons that Professor just laid out, South Korea was an apt partner due to things like compatibility, value for money, and speed of delivery. So I also just would think that just from what I know about Peru and kind of Latin America more generally, this is a region of the world with complicated topography where there's a history of land combat, of armed guerrilla groups, of insurgencies. I know in Peru in particular, there's the Shining Path and there's some other history of kind of renegade conflict between organized forces and less organized groups in kind of a challenging landscape, so I think that's probably a factor. And moving forward, I would also just say that I've also read about Peru kind of more branching out kind of more generally and seeking a wider range of partners. This is an area of the part of the world that like the U.S. has typically dominated, especially from a defense perspective. Peru will host the APEC meeting, I believe it's in the coming years, and so they have a kind of innate need to bolster their security in advance of that. But it seems to me like it's the kind of market that the South Korean firms would target as having pressing security needs and being kind of, at least in terms of its defense cooperation, kind of open to new partnerships, not like specifically locked into a traditional alliance or a traditional commercial structure with any one partner. So it seems like it has the potential for a win-win arrangement.
Right, and beyond Peru, Professor Kim, quite a number of pundits say military modernization appears to be a national initiative for quite a number of countries. What do you suppose is driving this campaign, if you will?
Yes, after World War II, although we had series of wars, but in general, we have been enjoying globalization and the expansion of trade. And under the expansion of globalization lied an assumption of non-zero-sum game, meaning ever-increasing mutual benefits coming from economic development and expansion of trade volumes. But since 1990s on, we are observing the symptoms of the end of globalization era, the evidence of which include conflicts based on religion, resource, slow economic growth, domestic conflict, ethnicity, protectionism, more recently, isolationism of foreign policy. All this will drive individual countries to recalculate the cost of rearmament. And this was reassured by the recent Russia-Ukraine war. And countries find that even superpower countries cannot find easy way to resolve those conflicts. So for them, it's a way to go into their own armament. And the assumption is that the assumption is changed into zero-sum game, where if I win, you lose, and we don't share. That's the new norm. And if somebody asks if this could be escalated to a wider scope war, a bigger scale, it's too early to tell, but necessary conditions for wider conflict are being accumulated right now.
Right, which is why quite a number of countries are choosing to modernize their military, it appears. Stephen, in the meantime, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute recently published a paper, that is, about South Korea's defense market and its related risks. Could you share them with us?
I think what the paper was trying to highlight is that in South Korean defense sector, there is a very close, very cooperative relationship between the private sector and the public sector, the government. I mean, when I've written about this, I always found it a little bit confusing when sometimes you have to say that South Korea has achieved this, South Korea has gotten this deal, and then you have to explain that these are actually private South Korean companies. I mean, this is not, so it's kind of this hybrid model. And I'd say that presents certain advantages just because there is the backing of the state, there is funding for research and development, South Korea can leverage its diplomatic networks in pursuit of these deals, so that when these companies go abroad, they are not just relying on their personal commercial networks. They have the support of the embassy in that country. They can get in the room with the right people who make these kinds of decisions. And that's all well and good, but I just say that there are some kind of inherent drawbacks to that model. When we're talking about business, when we're talking about a field that is reliant upon innovation and upon finding new and advantageous ways of doing things, a kind of state-led model can make that a little bit more difficult, because in order to get the kind of backing, you need to get approval from the government, and that might kind of discourage companies from taking risks. That might discourage companies from doing things that differ from the way that the South Korean military has customarily worked. So I think if you're a South Korean defense manufacturer, really what you want to be doing for commercial reasons is developing something that can be directly applied to the South Korean military, which is quite big, and you want to have access to these kinds of big contracts. You want to be in the room and have that kind of mainstream support. So what that kind of does, I think, sometimes is it locks companies into a certain kind of customary or traditional way of doing things. That's contained in the report, the Stockholm Center report that you mentioned. I would just say that viewing this from the perspective of a journalist, something that you have to kind of mention is the arms industry is not something that you can talk about in quite the same way as you can a lot of other exports-oriented industries, because it's a very lumpy kind of thing commercially. It's like, if you look at this deal we're talking about with Peru, like this is a deal that is going over, until 2040. It's a very long-term kind of thing. So depending on what happens in the geopolitical landscape, you may have arms producers who have 1 year where they sign a bunch of very big deals and they have a very exciting kind of result. And then for the following years, they are fulfilling those, they're working behind the scenes to fulfill those, but they're not announcing anything that's new. So from an outside perspective, it can seem as though the industry goes through these kinds of very drastic kind of peaks and valleys. So I would say that that's just an inherent limitation of the industry itself, and it's just something that we need to keep in mind when we talk about it and when we gauge the the success or the failure or the momentum. Just because if it so happens that over the next few years there are not more landmark deals announced, that doesn't mean that the industry is not going ahead in an advantageous way. It's just the kind of natural momentum of the arms sector.
Right, sure. For sure, something to think about, of course. Professor Kim, this particular paper published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute also claims that technology transfer and localized production setups, which is something that Stephen mentioned earlier with reference to the deal between South Korea and Peru, that these setups may ultimately serve to secure South Korea contracts for now, but that they risk turning South Korea's buyers into South Korea's competitors in the future. What are your thoughts, and what do you recommend to keep K-Defense competitive?
Indeed, Korea has been more generous in technology transfer and local industrialization packages than any other arms exporting competitors so far. And it is quite awakening that Stockholm report mentioned that. And basically, it's a double-edged issue. So I will mention both sides. The threat side goes in two ways. First, intellectual property right. That is, it takes long time and effort, budget, man hours to make a defense product. And if certain deals or one single deal will jeopardize the technological basis, then Korean defense industry should reconsider that deal in many ways. Second, Korean defense industries, like others, are not always selling cutting-edge products. They may be adjusting their level into low and medium level products customized for their customers. This segment of products will be direct hit by the technology deal because we are teaching all those things, and they are producing this low-end, medium-level segment products. So in some sense, for Korean defense industry's point of view, technology transfer may be bound within some limits in the future. That's one side. The other side is, while K2 tank is making progress, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, Korean industry is preparing next generation main battle tank titled as K3 already. So we are in some sense preparing for that as well. So that's one optimistic side. Also, we have successful track record for doing local cooperation successfully, like in the Australian Redback armored personal carrier case. So basically, it's a double-edged issue. It's a competition of how fast different players can adapt.
Right, and quite a bit of a balancing act, if you will. Stephen, moving forward, but staying with security, what's the latest with regard to South Korea's ambitions for nuclear-powered submarines?
As far as I know, a bunch of the details of the where, the when, and the who still need to be worked out. I mean, there was a real tone of celebration in Gyeongju when President Lee sought and received permission from President Trump to build these, but as best as I know, they haven't quite broken down the exact, they will be produced in this shipyard at this timeline. I mean, I don't think those, I'm in the President Lee's foreign media group chat, and as far as I know, he hasn't come out and said any of that. I mean, I do think in the ether, there was a kind of disagreement whereby Trump said on social media that these would be produced in the U.S., but the conventional wisdom was that South Korean officials would prefer to produce them in South Korea because this country has some better equipped and some more advanced shipyards here with the kind of know-how and the kind of human resources in place that is required to undertake a project of that magnitude. And just in the ensuing days and weeks, there has been, I think, some discussion as to whether or not the decision to develop nuclear-powered submarines kind of tests South Korea's commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. President Lee has been, I think, quite careful in his messaging, and he's said that the commitments to non-proliferation does allow for the use of certain forms of nuclear energy, and South Korea still has no plans to acquire nuclear weapons. And so I think just for the time being, until some of these more practical details get ironed out, President Lee and the South Korean administration will continue to face these types of questions as to what this all means. But hopefully we'll get some clarity on those points soon.
Right, hopefully. And in the meantime, Professor Kim, this is an impromptu question for you, but speaking again within your capacity as a scholar, were you surprised by the approval given by the Trump administration with regard to South Korea's pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines?
Yes, it was like if I make a metaphor, it's like Gordian's knot, solving the unsolved homework at once. But there is one common element between commercial side and what Korea is pursuing as the nuclear-powered submarine. That is, we are using very low enrichment level fuel, because in the future, many countries will need something called small modular reactor for electricity needed for AI and data center and all other civilization needs. And this submarine is using also that low-grade enrichment level fuel, and also at the same time fulfilling defense needs of the country, also contributing to the power balance, safety of East Asia. So I was quite thinking it's an optimistic and very promising project, and I was surprised at first.
As were quite a number of pundits here in the country. All right, on that note, we'll end today's talk. Professor Kim, thank you so much for your insights today.
I really enjoyed.
Right. And here in the studio, Stephen, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Right. On that note, we say goodbye. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe.